For a lot of people, the name Ashland Highland won't resonate. What is that? For me, that's the same. I never heard of it. I didn't know what it was. For any name to actually resonate with a person, you have to kind of hear it multiple times from different sources in different ways, and then it's like, oh, that's what that is. Well, I'm not sure if I heard it my first trip to Virginia back in December of 2010. I might have, and it just didn't click. But I heard it again this time, and since it was only a couple miles away from Monticello, I thought, well, why don't you take a visit and see what's there? For those of you who are not aware of what Ashland Highland is, that is the residence of James Monroe, the 5th President of the United States. Now, I'm not adept on the history of James Monroe. I know that he served in the Revolutionary War. I think he was like a lieutenant, perhaps, under George Washington. He did hold a number of cabinet positions. I think he was Secretary of War and Secretary of State. But as far as any, he wasn't, like James Madison, the father of the Constitution. He wasn't like Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence. He wasn't George Washington, being the leader of the Continental Forces. But he was there. So his residence deserves a look. Okay, I have just left Mishy's Tavern, and I am on I think it's Thomas Jefferson Parkway that heads directly by Monticello on my way to Ashland, which is James Monroe's residence. I'm going to give you a little picture of the winding road that takes you through the mountain here. Of course, this is the busy time of the day, quarter before 1 o'clock. Very narrow road, but very adventurous too. Let's see if I can make it through this alive. Not a very long road. 2.5 miles to Ashland. And straight up ahead, I think on the other side of this bridge, turn right, and on the right there, that is the entrance to Monticello. Of course, I was there yesterday. Today I'm heading on to see James Monroe's residence. Interesting how they were so close. I guess I need to study history a little bit more to realize that these two men lived so nearby. I've heard a little bit of history about how Thomas Jefferson and James Madison would quite often visit one another, but never heard anything about James Monroe and Thomas Jefferson visiting one another. Maybe they did, and history just kind of didn't say anything about it. Well, that was a little bit of my trip to Ashland. Ashland. I get that mixed up. I will keep on saying Ashland, but it's Ashland Highland. And I add that in there because I remember the first time I drove that road, it made me think of the reality TV show on the History Channel, Ice Road Truckers' Deadliest Roads. And if you've seen the roads they've driven on those shows, you'll know exactly what I mean. Well, I didn't get a lot of video, because Ashland, like all the historical places, they prohibit the recording of video indoors. And I learned why that is exactly from visiting here at Ashland, or there at Ashland. The guide was a wealth of knowledge, and he explained that they did not have presentation rights or some type of rights for the things that they had on loan from private collectors. So there's that's a lot of the reason why, and I'm sure that's probably the major reason why all the other places prohibit indoor picture taking. What's coming up now is a few pictures I took outdoors of the house, of the grounds, a beautiful view. I mean, all these places, gorgeous views there in Virginia. And the house, if you'll notice, well, take a look and I'll explain as you see. One regret I have is I didn't take any pictures or any video of going in. It's very picturesque, a very, very gorgeous setting, as you can see in the fields there, and the gardens that they have working. Very serene environment. Now, interesting thing about the house is this part here is the James Monroe house, the white part. That is where he and his wife and family lived. The yellow part of the house is what was added on by a minister, I believe it was, who bought the facility, and that is why the place has two names, Ashland, Highland. There's one additional thing I think I should mention about the house there at Ashland. In one of the pictures, if you saw, there was two levels, and the level underneath was actually the kitchen area, which is very unusual for its time. Thomas Jefferson also had his kitchen underneath his house. But normally, from what I pick up from the guides I've listened to, the normal habit was to have the kitchen separated from the house because of the fire hazard. Well, having a kitchen underneath the house was somehow a French, a European style, and so this is something that James Monroe picked up from Thomas Jefferson. That's one reason he's only a couple miles away from Monticello. He wanted to live near Thomas Jefferson, and but ironically, from what the guide said, James Monroe only lived about 6 of his years there at Ashland. The rest of it was in public service. Now this was very interesting. These buildings to the left were slave quarters, and there was also a guest quarters. The story the guide gave was that James Monroe's wife was getting very fed up with all the guests they were having, so she had this guest quarters constructed, and it looks very nice, very accommodating for people coming to visit, and that's where they would stay. They would not be staying in the house any longer, they would be staying out there. And it's very ironic that all these founding fathers had such problems with all the people wanting to visit. Just a little bit of the sights here at James Monroe's plantation. Now, there's one common necessity that I've found that every founding father residence needs, and that is a life-size statue, which Ashland does have as well. The interesting thing about presidential founding father homes is how the government didn't want them. It took private individuals to bind together into a personal foundation that would raise money and operate these and restore them to life. The federal government turned them down. Now, where Ashland fits into this, I'm not exactly certain, because it was willed to the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, James Monroe's alma mater. Well, it is 2:36 in the afternoon on the 3rd day of August 2012, and I am just now getting ready to depart from Ashland, Highland, the home of James Monroe. It had a very wonderful entrance. I wanted to see if I could capture that without the iPad falling over. So, gorgeous view. I mean, I believe off to the right is
5.4 miles. miles, then turn left on James Monroe Parkway.
Okay. Let me see if I can catch some of this. I mean, a wonderful entrance. The trees lining both sides of the road, or the pathway, whatever it might be called. Cattle on the side of the, trying to catch some shade, I guess. And the only thing I could say about this place was the tour was wonderful. I mean, the guy who was the guide gave
left on James Monroe Parkway.
Gave excellent. I mean, he knew everything. I mean, he was wonderful. The house is interesting, and the view was just fabulous. I mean, but that was about the size of it. You know, there was nothing really beyond that. I mean, you could look at the slave quarters, and there was the overseer's house, and then the guest quarters. But that was about it. I thought it would be a good idea to add a little bit more about the house before I close this video out, because the guide was exceptional. He didn't have much to work with, but he opened up a world to who this man James Monroe was. He was more than just the 5th president of the United States and a Revolutionary War participant. He was like any of us. He had a personality, he did things, and he accomplished things. Well, the tour begins in the Highland part of the house, the yellow part, that was built on to James Monroe's residence by the minister. From that point, you know, there's a room set up with a number of different artifacts, and you know, the guide goes through some of James Monroe's life and talks about his wife and so forth. Then you go into the actual Monroe house, and the first room you come to is the drawing room. That leads into the dining room, and then behind the dining room is the Monroe's bedroom. All these rooms are, in my mind, small. You know, it's like, when you're thinking president and founding father and Revolutionary War participant, you're thinking huge. But these are just people, and they lived as frugally as they could, and every one of them, you know, James Monroe included, died in debt. You know, they didn't die with riches and abundance. They weren't kings and princes and all this. They died in debt. They were farmers, you know, and they did extraordinary things, including, you know, here. But the house was, you know, drawing room where you'd receive guests, then the dining room where you'd eat with the guests, and then the bedroom where you would sleep, and then there was a privy in between, which is really kind of odd because you think a privy between the dining room and the bedroom, but I guess they had it worked out. The guide said that later on, James, he added on a bedroom for his daughter, and there was another room that was added on with that, the green room he called it, and I guess that was a kind of receiving room. But when you see the outside, you see it's not a big house. And when you visit the other places, Monticello, Mount Vernon, and so forth, they're not castles. They are just someone's home.